The furniture was already in the truck, the door locked, and no one noticed that a boy was still inside. Benji didn't scream. He didn't have a voice for that. All he knew was how to hide. And that's exactly what he did when he heard footsteps approaching in that dark basement, just minutes before the family left the house for good. Trying to shield himself from the cold sneaking in through the early morning hours, he took refuge in the damp corner of a house about to be sold, unaware that what would come next would make him relearn how to live, or disappear, without anyone noticing. He spent days locked in silence, hungry, feverish, talking to the void as if the walls were the only friends he had left. And then, when hope had already faded, a lonely old woman walked through the door. If this story touched you in any way, if you've ever felt that the world forgets people who are still breathing, then leave a like. It shows that you still care. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real, human, necessary, subscribe to the channel. The furniture was already in the truck, the door locked. No one noticed what had been left behind, not even those who had lived there for 5 years. Among decorative plants, expensive toys, and Christmas parties that opened onto the lit balcony of Brush Park in Detroit. Benji entered unnoticed, thin, with a grimy face, hollow eyes from accumulated sleep and hunger patched together with trash can scraps. He had been watching the commotion since before sunrise. He knew a move was an opportunity. Distracted people, abandoned objects, forgotten food. He waited for the perfect moment. The distracted lady signing a paper with the realtor, the executive-looking man carrying a monitor, the little girl crying because her tablet had been boxed up. And then, as quietly as someone who doesn't want to be seen, he crossed the back gate, slid along the side of the house and descended the stairs into the half-open basement. Inside, it was cold, and the smell was a mix of old wood and mold. But for someone who had slept on urine-soaked cardboard in the alley of 3rd Street, that floor was almost a hug. He found open boxes, old blankets, broken toys. He squeezed into the darkest corner, behind a fallen cabinet. He didn't blink. His racing heart seemed to give away his presence, but no one came. Hours passed and the silence deepened, until a metallic bang echoed upstairs. It was the door being closed, locked, and then nothing. Benji waited. Minutes, maybe hours. He couldn't tell. Time was a stray animal to him. At first he thought of leaving, but the basement door handle no longer turned. He pushed, hit it with his open palm, then with his fists. But the sounds were muffled, and the house was already empty. He stayed quiet. Maybe someone would come back. Maybe it was just a pause. He lay down on the worn blanket and pretended he was part of the furniture. Outside, life went on. Neighbors waved goodbye from afar. The truck drove away. The sold sign was turned around. And the world moved on with its Monday rhythm, unaware that behind those freshly vacated walls a boy breathed alone, forgotten, invisible. On the first day, he ate a granola bar he found open in a box, drank the leftover juice someone had spilled in a tipped bottle. On the second day, he tried to go up again, pushing the stairs, kicking the door. Nothing. He started talking to himself, called for the mother he never knew, apologized to a father that only existed in dreams, imagined voices outside, but no one answered. The basement had a small window covered in cobwebs and grime, too high for him to reach. Even standing on the fallen cabinet, he could only see the cloudy sky. Street noise barely made it through. Sometimes a bark, a horn. At night, the house creaked with the wind as if it were breathing. He slept in fragments. On the third day, the food was gone. His stomach hurt. His throat was dry. Benji started licking the dripping heater pipe. Hour by hour, he collected drops in a dirty cup. He invented voices, characters. A box became his dog, an old shoe, his mother. He pretended to be saved, pretended someone was looking for him, but no one was. Outside, no one knew. No one missed him. And that Friday, when the weather started to change and a light rain wet the sidewalks of Detroit, an elderly lady with white hair and slow steps pushed the iron gate of house number 218. Margot Whitmore was 72 years old and had just bought that house like one buys an old book at a fair, because she felt something. Widowed for almost 2 decades, daughter of a strict military man, she had spent most of her life following rules. Now she wanted silence, a place to grow flowers, listen to jazz and forget about time. The empty house seemed perfect. When she entered for the first time, the living room light was still cut off. Dust rose from the steps. The former owner's boxes were there and would remain until further notice. Margot sat in the forgotten armchair, closed her eyes, and breathed in the past. That night, she heard the first noise. A creak, a soft sound, as if someone stepped on wet wood. She thought it was the wind, or her memory. The next day, another sound, something like a scratch. She was cleaning the kitchen when she stopped to listen more carefully. She called out, "Is someone there?" Nothing. She thought it was a rat, or a lost cat. That night she dreamed of the son who left too soon. She woke up crying. In the basement, Benji no longer cried. His body was feverish, his face sweaty. He didn't remember the last time he had slept. His skin burned. His head throbbed. He started singing a song he used to hear on the streets. The voice came out weak, but it was all he had. That's when Margot, now on her third day in the house, heard the sound clearly for the first time. It wasn't a rat. It wasn't the wind. It was a melody. She went down the stairs with her heart pounding, grabbed the flashlight. The basement smelled of abandonment. She hesitated, and then she heard it again. The song, scratchy, fragile, mixed with silence. And when the light cut through the shadows and landed in the left corner behind the cabinet, she saw him. Benji, dirty, pale, curled up like an abandoned puppy, wide-eyed, struggling to breathe. He didn't run, didn't move. He just stared at her. Margot dropped the flashlight. They remained in silence, a silence that said everything. She knelt down. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, no one else existed in the world. Margot avoided turning on the television. The loud sound bothered her. She preferred silence. It allowed her to better hear the house's footsteps. She had learned to interpret its creaks, its groans, its pauses. Ever since she found Benji in the basement, her body seemed to listen to the world on a different frequency. She would come down with soup, clothes, towels. Nothing more was said than necessary. A nod, a hand gesture. Benji seemed to understand each of these signals. It was as if he had developed his own dictionary to survive among distracted adults. In the basement, days passed slowly. He slept wrapped in a thick blanket Margot had given him. He drank water from the same pipe that dripped beside the boiler, and he spoke to the void, not out of fantasy, but necessity. He gave names to the boxes around him, as if naming things helped him remember he existed. "This one is Trevor. He gets mad when I sit on him," he murmured, sitting on a pile of cardboard. He spoke to keep from losing his mind, to stay grounded. Sometimes he mimicked voices he'd heard on the streets. Sometimes he replayed conversations with the few adults who had ever given him attention. He laughed alone at old situations, but then would go quiet, as if remembering no one was really listening. Margot noticed the traces of trauma in his movements. His eyes always too alert, as if expecting a blow at any moment. His shoulders hunched, his feet nearly always bare, even when clean socks were nearby. He hesitated at any sign of kindness. He didn't touch what was offered until she stepped away, as if still expecting to be punished for accepting. She began writing down small details about him in a blue notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer. Not for control, but out of care. She wanted to remember what he ate, what he refused, the names he gave objects. "Started sleeping for longer stretches," she once wrote. "Said for the first time that he's lived on the street since he was 6. Benji had few moments of trust. One afternoon, with sunlight sneaking through the basement crack, he remarked, as if counting time, "I had a sister, but I think she left. Or they left me. Or both." Margot didn't ask more. She just listened, and that was enough. In the mornings, she cleaned the house. It was too big for just one person. One room in particular caught her attention. The back bedroom, the smallest in the house, with empty shelves, peeling paint, and old children's stickers still on the walls. Apparently it was a child's room, perhaps the son of the previous owners. Though empty, it carried a strangely intimate atmosphere. Margot found herself entering there often, as if visiting a space that spoke something she couldn't quite explain. She started sweeping the floor, cleaning the corners more carefully. She organized the few children's books left behind, dusted off a rocket-shaped lamp, even changed the bedsheet, which was still wrapped in plastic from the move, without knowing why. Something about that room made her stay in silence longer than anywhere else in the house. Maybe it was just the fact that now there was a child in her home. Maybe it was more than that. She couldn't say. She just felt it. On the 6th day after returning from the market, Margot found Benji sitting on the basement stairs. He wasn't trying to escape. He just wanted light. His eyes looked less hollow. His hair still tangled, but his face cleaner. She didn't send him back. She simply said, "Want to take a bath?" He hesitated. He had never taken a bath in a tub. When he entered, he remained still for several minutes. He didn't know if he was allowed to play with the bubbles. When Margot returned, he was scrubbing his arms too hard, as if trying to scrape the dirt from his bones. She handed him a towel and said, "Slowly. Your skin doesn't need to be torn off." He looked at her strangely, but obeyed. That night, she let him sleep on the living room sofa, with a folded blanket and a new pillow. They didn't talk. The silence between them was comfortable. No questions were demanded. No answers pressured. Margot noticed he had a habit of stacking objects. 3 books, a box, a shoe, as if he needed to organize the chaos around him to calm his mind. She also saw that he slept on his side with his arms protecting his chest, like someone who had learned sleep was a dangerous place. One night she watched him through a crack in the door. He was dozing while moving his fingers in the air, as if counting invisible stars. Only his breathing and the ticking of the kitchen clock could be heard. The house, once too silent, now seemed alive. On a Sunday, while making pancakes, Margot slipped and asked, "When were you born?" Benji thought, furrowed his brow. "I think in December or January. There was still a Christmas decoration in the trash when I left my aunt's house." "How old do you think you are?" 9 or 10, but no one ever told me for sure." She nodded, went back to stirring the batter. The scent of cinnamon filled the air. Benji, sitting on the chair with his legs swinging, waited as if he couldn't believe it was really for him. After that breakfast, she stopped keeping him in the basement. There was no need anymore. Little by little, he began helping with small chores, sorting clean clothes, watering plants, sweeping the porch. Margot noticed his presence in the details: the extra toothbrush in the cup, the tiny footprints on the rug, the extra silverware at the table. She was beginning to get used to it, as if she were becoming needed again. But not everything was light. Benji still had moments of withdrawal. Certain words triggered memories in him. When he heard Margot yelling on the phone with the power company, he froze, eyes wide, body trembling. She noticed and hung up immediately, sat beside him and said only, "It wasn't at you. It never will be." He nodded, but his eyes took a while to relax. One afternoon, while they swept the yard together, a social services car drove slowly down the street. Benji shrank behind a bush. Margot tried to act natural. When the car left, he whispered, "Would they take me again?" She didn't answer immediately, then said, "Not if you don't want them to." He swallowed hard, spoke softly, "I want to stay." And it was that same week that Margot made a decision. She opened the box where she kept her old documents, letters, papers, certificates. She separated the ones that could help. One was a medical statement exempting her from certain duties due to her age. Another, a deed of a property in the countryside. And finally, a letter written years ago by her son, in which he said, "If one day you find someone who needs love more than rules, do for them what you'd do for me." She read the letter 3 times. That night she wrote on a napkin, as if recording something not to forget. "He already sleeps without fear." Started drawing. "And today he called me Miss Margot, without me asking. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know something inside me is waking up." However, at the end of that week, an unexpected letter arrived in the mail. A white envelope, no return address, a notice. It was from the house's former owner. Something had been forgotten. Something Margot had no idea about. And what was about to be revealed would change everything. Benji was waking up a little earlier each day. He no longer slept as much. Sometimes he spent minutes just staring at the ceiling, as if trying to make sure it was all still real, that the blanket over him was warm, that the smell of the house was real food, that no one would make him leave before the next breakfast. Since Margot brought him upstairs after the basement days, a quiet routine between them had begun to take shape. He didn't ask if he could stay. She didn't say he should. but every gesture between them was like an invisible thread stitching together what had once been too torn to mend. Margot left the bedroom door slightly ajar, and it was always her who said, "Good morning," first. A new habit that made her feel both strange and tender. His voice answered in a low tone, barely audible, as if he were still testing the idea of being welcome. Little by little, the boy began claiming spaces. First the bathroom, then the kitchen, then the living room table where he would draw for hours with the notebook and colored pencils she had bought. He drew houses, lots of houses, some with crooked roofs, others surrounded by trees, some with huge windows. He never drew people. Margot noticed, but didn't comment. On a cloudy Sunday, while they were drying the dishes together, she asked, "Have you ever been to school?" Benji answered without looking up from the dish towel. "I went once, but I got in a fight. Then I didn't go back. They said I was too much trouble." Margot nodded. The same answer could have come from thousands of children across the country, but coming from him, it hurt more, because he said it calmly, as if he had accepted that he didn't belong. In the following days, she began teaching him small things, showed him how to make tea, sort bills by color, write his name in cursive. He tried hard. Every correction was met with full attention, and when he made mistakes, he apologized. Margot told him it wasn't necessary, that mistakes were part of learning, but he insisted, as if still afraid he might be thrown out for a simple error. She started leaving little notes around the house with short messages. "The sun will shine today. Remember to drink water. You draw really well." At first, Benji found it odd. Then he started replying. He wrote notes too. "The soup was good. I like the smell of the soap. Your hands are grandma-like, but you're cool." Margot kept them all in a tin box. The time between them became lighter, but there were still things he didn't say, and she knew she couldn't force them. She just listened to the silences. One night, after a dinner of pancakes and warm milk, Benji stood quietly looking out the window. Outside, the street lamp flickered. "Do you think someone could ever really want me?" he asked. Margot felt her throat dry. She answered after a while, "Someone already does. They just don't know how to say it yet." He didn't reply, but that night, he slept more peacefully than ever before. The next morning, while they folded laundry in the living room, Margot saw a thin scar on his left arm. It was long, uneven. She didn't ask right away, only later, when he sat on the floor and began drawing another house. "Was it someone?" she asked, discreetly pointing. Benji looked, touched the scar as if it no longer belonged to him. "A woman. She was angry, not my mom, but I lived with her. She cut me with a piece of glass because I spilled rice." Margot closed her eyes for a moment. "And your mom?" He shrugged. "Disappeared. One day she left me at that woman's house. Said she'd come back. I waited a long time. Then I stopped." Silence fell like a heavy blanket over the two of them. Margot reached out and gently touched his shoulder. "There are things no one should ever do, but unfortunately they happen. What matters is what you do with it afterward." He nodded and drew a house with 4 windows and 2 bicycles outside. The following week, Margot enrolled him at a community library 3 blocks away. Not as a student, he didn't have documents yet, but as a visitor. The staff, used to similar situations, allowed him to read, draw, and attend story time. It was a new world, and he dove into it with the thirst of someone whose imagination had always been locked away. One afternoon, as they left the library, they passed a newsstand. Benji stopped in front of a poster with photos of missing children. He stood in silence for a few seconds. "A friend of mine was on there once," he said, "but no one found him." Margot looked, didn't recognize any faces. "And you?" "I'm not there. No one looked for me." She didn't know what to say. She just held his hand tightly, and they kept walking. At home, Margot called an old friend who worked at the registry office. She wanted to know how to start a request for temporary custody. She would need witnesses, maybe a lawyer, but the idea was becoming clear. She wouldn't let him be taken again. But that same week, something unexpected happened. A new neighbor moved into the house next door. A middle-aged man, polite, bearded, wearing a dress shirt. He introduced himself as Tom Harrington, real estate agent, recently divorced. In the following days, Tom made small talk whenever he could, offered help with the garden, brought an apple pie, complimented Margot's lavender bed. She thanked him, but kept her distance. She wasn't the kind of woman to open doors easily. One day, while Benji was watering the porch plants, Tom watched him closely. "Is he your grandson?" he asked. Margot hesitated. "Something like that. Good-looking kid? Got a name?" She smiled, reserved. "Benji. Don't know many boys named that." The next day, the black car returned to the street. It stopped across the road like before. Two people got out, talked, wrote something down, and left. Margot slowly closed the curtain. Benji noticed the gesture. "Did something happen?" She hesitated, then replied, "Not yet, but it might." That night she had trouble sleeping, and it wasn't because of her age or the hip pain. It was a premonition, a real fear, a fear only real mothers know, the fear of losing what you learned to love too late. Margot had never imagined herself back in the routine of schedules, timely meals, the small commitments that build the everyday life of a living home. But now, every morning had its new ritual. The sound of the kitchen faucet, the smell of fresh brewed coffee, the rustling of leaves being swept in the yard. Benji was there, waking up with the sun, part of the scene as if he had always belonged. He had learned to wash his face on his own, to floss, to fold his own clothes. The first time Margot saw him setting the table before lunch, placing the silverware exactly beside the plate, she stood in silence, watching. He noticed her gaze and asked, "Is it wrong?" "No, it's perfect." She turned away to hide her tears. Benji didn't talk much about the past, and Margot didn't push, but small bits of information leaked through the cracks of the day. The food he hated, the corner of the city where he used to sleep wrapped in cardboard, the name of the woman who beat him with a metal spoon. It all came little by little, like breadcrumbs from a story too big to tell all at once. And while he learned to exist with more calm, Margot was relearning how to take part in the world. She began replying to her daughter's messages more often, accepted an invitation for a tea afternoon with neighbors, something she hadn't done since moving in, laughed out loud for the first time while watching a cartoon together, and caught herself humming a random song while cleaning the living room windows. Benji drew every day. He left papers scattered around the house like clues to thoughts he didn't yet know how to put into words. Margot gathered each one with care, placed them in a folder with an elastic band, and secretly began making plans to show them to someone one day. A teacher, a psychologist, maybe even a judge if necessary. But none of the plans moved quickly. She wanted to protect their time together. One morning while they were organizing the laundry room closet, Benji found a wooden box with a lock. Margot looked at it and hesitated for a moment. Then she grabbed the key from atop the cabinet, handed it to him and said, "You can open it." Inside were photos. Many. All of her son. As a child, a teenager, a young man. Benji looked slowly at each image. In one of them, the boy smiled, holding a blue bicycle. What was his name? Samuel. Did he go away? He did. Benji didn't ask how or when. He just looked at the photo a bit longer, then gently placed it back into the box and said, "Do you think he would have liked me?" Margot took a moment to answer. "I think so. He would have invited you to ride bikes with him, and he would have laughed at your walk just like I do." Benji smiled. Margot too. But the silence between them in that moment said everything they weren't yet ready to put into words. 2 weeks later, while returning from the community library, they were approached by a woman in a blue vest with a hanging badge. She was a social worker. Someone had filed an anonymous report. They mentioned a boy living with an elderly woman without apparent connection. Margot tried to stay calm, invited the woman in, served coffee. Benji stayed quiet, observing every move the visitor made. He answered only what was asked. Name, approximate age, how he ended up there. He spoke little but firmly. The social worker seemed skeptical at first. She looked around for signs of neglect, disorder, carelessness. She found nothing. The house was clean. There was food, clothes, a corner with neatly stacked drawings, books piled up. And more than that, there was something immeasurable, a sense of respect, of genuine care. "You know this situation is irregular, don't you?" the woman said in a softer tone. "I do. But sometimes irregular is the only path left when no one else is looking out for these children," Margot replied. Benji lowered his eyes. The social worker asked to return another day with a colleague. Margot agreed. When she left, Benji sat on the steps and stayed quiet. "Are they going to take me away?" he asked. "I don't know. But I'll do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen, Margot answered, sitting beside him. She spent the next week gathering documents, contacted a lawyer recommended by a church friend, explained the situation. The lawyer advised her to file for temporary custody urgently. It would be hard, but not impossible. Her age might count against her. But the real bond, the home's condition, Benji's testimony, all of that would work in their favor. At the next interview, the social worker returned with a colleague. They asked detailed questions about the routine, meals, hygiene, health. Margot presented the meal calendar, the medical exams she had scheduled for Benji, the saved drawings, the exchanged notes. Benji was called for a separate conversation. When he returned, he sat beside her and held her hand. It was the first time he did that in public. Both workers wrote something down. The woman, the same from the first visit, smiled softly before closing her notebook. "You're different from what we expected," she said as she said goodbye. That night, Margot lit candles on the table, even with no reason. Cooked rice with carrots and grilled chicken. Benji set the table. They ate in silence, but it was the good kind, the kind that asks for no explanation. When they finished, he cleared the table and washed everything with care. Then he handed her a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing. In it, two people, a white-haired woman and a boy with a backpack. Behind them, a small house, and beside it a sign, "Family." Margot looked at the image for minutes, then pinned the drawing to the fridge with a colorful magnet and said, "No matter what they say out there, in here, you're already mine." Benji didn't answer. He just hugged her, and in that moment, he didn't feel as small as before. He had grown, a little more whole, a little stronger, but the peace lasted less than they'd hoped. 3 days later, Margot received an official letter from the juvenile court. Benji's name was now tied to a previous investigation involving a closed case of abandonment. Someone had unearthed the past he'd spent his life trying to leave behind, and now, that past was knocking on their door. Margot sat at the living room table with the official letter in her hands. The cold language of the law didn't belong in the warm home she had built so carefully. The old investigation, now reopened, stated that Benji had once been listed in a child abandonment report filed years ago, but never followed up. His name was attached to a shelved, forgotten case. Until now. She took a deep breath. She didn't tell Benji everything that night. She only said they would need to talk to important people and that a few visits might happen. He nodded. He didn't ask questions. He trusted her. The next morning, Margot called the lawyer and decided to formalize the request for permanent custody. She knew she would face resistance, not because of her past, but because of her age. 72 wasn't what the courts considered an ideal profile to take in a minor. But she also knew what was ideal for Benji: safety, care, affection, and that she had in abundance. The process began. Meetings, interviews, testimonies. Benji was heard. So was Margot. The neighbor across the street, who had barely said hello before, signed a letter of support. The young woman from the library wrote a heartfelt statement about how the boy had changed in recent months. Even the lawyer, a skeptical man, confessed he had never seen such a clear bond in a case like this. Meanwhile, a local reporter discovered the story. A small piece ran in the city newspaper. Abandoned boy taken in by elderly woman in Detroit residential neighborhood. The article gained traction. Then more. Soon a TV crew showed up at the house. Benji appeared from behind, drawing. Margot said little. She only said, "I didn't do anything more than what any decent person should do when they find someone who's hungry, afraid, and forgotten by the world." The response was unexpected. Neighbors who once never waved began bringing fruit, clothes, books. The local school offered tutoring. An adoption support NGO offered psychological services. The house that once locked Benji in darkness was now becoming a symbol of care. But the process wasn't easy. During one of the hearings, a prosecutor raised concerns about Margot's physical ability. She suggested that, despite her good intentions, Margot might not be able to keep up with a growing teenager. Benji was present. He asked to speak. With the judge's permission, he stood and said, "I've been to a lot of places. I slept in shelters, on sidewalks, in homes where people hurt me. Only here did I find someone who never yelled at me, never hit me, never made me feel like I was a problem. I don't need someone young. I need someone who stays." The courtroom fell silent. The prosecutor lowered her eyes. The judge asked for a few days to decide. That week the phone rang at Margot's house. It was the TV network. They wanted to do a special feature on them. Margot declined, said she didn't want to turn their story into a spectacle. But Benji, curious, asked, "Why not tell it?" She thought for a moment and replied, "Because what we live here is worth more than any headline, and not everything beautiful needs to be news." 2 days later, the decision arrived. Custody granted. Margot cried silently. She just sat in her armchair and let the tears fall into her lap. Benji saw her from afar. He didn't say anything. He just sat beside her and rested his head on her shoulder. They stayed like that for several minutes without words. In the following months, life settled into more stability. Benji was officially enrolled in school, got a uniform, books, a lunchbox. Margot arranged his schedule with care, cooked his meals with special attention. He grew fast, started liking soccer, drew less but still left funny notes around the house. With time, their bond became natural, routine. He called her Margot when in a good mood, and ma'am when teasing her. She in turn began signing her notes with a little heart, something she had never even done for her own son. 5 years passed. Benji was now a tall teenager, voice changing, firm in his ideas. He had a group of friends, a favorite teacher, and a folder of praised essays. Margot remained strong. Whiter hair, slower steps, but eyes still alert. One day, while he brewed coffee, she joked, "You've become a man, and I, a burden." He laughed, looked at her, and replied, "You're the root, and I grew because someone gave me soil." That year, the school held an event on stories of resilience. Students were invited to speak. One of the counselors suggested Benji share his story. He hesitated, then agreed. The auditorium was full. Parents, teachers, classmates. Margot sat in the front row. She wore a simple dress and an old brooch. She was nervous, like a mother watching her child take the stage for the first time. Benji stepped up to the microphone, adjusted it, looked out at the crowd, took a deep breath. "I don't have many childhood photos, no birth certificate. I don't even remember my mother's face. But I remember the day a woman opened the door to her home, gave me a bowl of soup, and didn't ask where I came from. She only asked if I wanted to stay." He paused. The audience was utterly silent. I was forgotten. I walked alone, slept on stairs, on park benches. I was taught that my place was wherever no one looked, until she saw me, not with pity, but with courage, and showed me that family isn't born only from blood, but from the choice to stay, even when the world tells you to give up. Another pause. "My name is Benji, and the woman who saved me is sitting right there, Miss Margot. And if I'm here today, it's because someone reminded me that I deserve to exist." Applause. Standing ovation. Margot bowed her head. She cried quietly. Benji stepped off the stage and hugged her. Their story became a reference at the school. Other families were inspired. Couples decided to open their doors to invisible children. Teachers began to pay closer attention to the quiet students. The change was small, but it was real. Margot lived for several more years, in good health, with dignity, with a serene kind of joy she thought would never return. When she passed away, nearly 80 years old, Benji handled everything. The house, the paperwork, the old photos. He kept the same house, kept the drawing notebook, and kept the habit of leaving notes around the house just like she used to. On the first one, taped to the fridge, he wrote, "I grew up, but you were the one who planted me." And on her old desk, where she wrote her lists, he left one final message. "I was the boy you saved, but you were the woman I found in the dark, and who turned on the light for both of us." And you? Have you ever met someone who changed your life just by staying? Tell us in the comments. Who was the person who saw you when no one else did? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click on the next video showing on your screen now to hear another emotional story.